Hey everyone, good evening. I just wanted to film a quick video to talk about something that we read this morning in the Introduction to a Devout Life. The world is in a crazy place right now. Anyone who is even vaguely following the incredibly important political landscape right now is probably struggling with a little bit of worry, if not a lot of worry. Um, it is a crazy time to be alive. There's a lot of amazing things happening. I firmly believe that the novena started by Cardinal Burke to Our Lady of Guadalupe in March, the 9-month novena for our country, is working. The amount of major people coming into the church or even just coming into Christianity, the amount of miracles happening, and the retaliation from evil is amazing. There's no question we are living through historic times that will be recounted for many years to come. And to be living through those times comes with a lot of mixed emotions, especially as a parent. I know for me, there's a double layer to the reactions to everything going on. You have feelings of general, concern and wondering what's going to happen, more like out of curiosity for yourself, the world you live in, kind of general wonderings about what your future will look like. But then there's an added layer of stress and responsibility when you think about your kids. I think every parent out there thinks, I wish that I knew what I could do to magically insulate my kids in a bubble and keep them safe from all of these threats, especially big, major threats, like some of those that are floating around out there, things that a lot of unknowns, a lot of extremes being mentioned. And at the end of the day, though, you really have to kind of think about, okay, what can I control? And believe me, everything I'm about to say is not said in a preaching way. It's said in a manner of one who used to struggle with a lot of intense worry and anxiety over things, and has slowly but surely learned how to just recognize, I guess what is in the Bible from the beginning. Jesus says in the Bible, what will worrying add 1 cubit to your lifespan? What will it do for you? It won't do anything. So just let today's worries be sufficient for today. It's right there. It's all boiled down right there. And yet it can be so hard to do that. It can be so hard to just leave it all and let God take care of it. And I think part of that is because we feel like we need to be responsible. We feel like we need to plan ahead, especially as a parent. It feels like I need to be able to make the correct plans. What if, because of my own negligence, my kids are left vulnerable to an evil I could have prevented? And there was something so powerful in the Introduction to a Devout Life that really struck me. And he basically, in his section on anxiety, was talking about the difference between worry. Basically, it was interesting because the section was about anxiety, and yet he immediately starts talking about sadness, because that's immediately how we feel when we feel anxious, isn't it? We start to feel anxious, but the main reason that anxiety becomes a bigger problem is that we start to feel sad. So I've heard somebody say one time that anxiety is actually, it's adrenaline. I think I heard a psychologist or something talking about it, like, that's the feeling of anxiety, but the kind of thing that really cuts us deeper and lingers is the sadness that results from the things that we're anxious about, like St. Francis de Sales was saying. And so he says the sadness, whether it comes from temptations or perceived evils, external or internal. It can be things like temptations, things we're sad or anxious about from our soul perspective, or from a bodily perspective, sickness, war, these things like that. And as parents, we worry for our kids, or we worry for our loved ones, our friends, our siblings, our parents. And he makes an important distinction. He says, worry, sadness like this, that ultimately comes from a place of loving God, we will be able to handle with patience and gentleness and trust. Because ultimately, if our desire to be rescued from this sadness, from this thing we're anxious about, is because of we come from a place of loving God, we'll trust that if we're meant to be rescued from it, we will. And in the meantime, we're just meant to bear our daily crosses, do the best we can, and trust that He will do the rest, knowing that if it's not a cross that's meant to be taken from us, it won't go away, and we'll be given the grace we need to carry it. But if it's a cross that we are meant to be spared from, it will go away, and we just need to be faithful in our daily duties. But if we are anxious about it from a place of self-love, even if it's a natural, St. Francis de Sales is wonderful about recognizing just kind of natural human emotion, like feeling. Like he say, it's normal to want to protect yourself. That's the human instinct. And you protect your kids. But if at the end of the, like kind of at the root of it, it's more of a self-love that's creating the anxiety, then you will continue to have anxiety, sadness, stress. You'll be very agitated and desperate and distressed and feeling like you have to take care of it. And that was very convicting, and it kind of really put things in a very clear light, which is why I just thought I'd pop on here and share it, because I think that it's easy to get mistaken. As someone who's had a lot of chronic health issues, you end up really digging for answers, looking for answers, and being willing to try all sorts of things, and it can feel like going to the end of the earth to try to get better. And all of a sudden, you kind of have to stop and remember, it's good to want to feel better. It's important not to just accept things that prevent you from doing your daily duties well, especially if they could be hindering you fulfilling your calling. It's important to discern whether or not you're meant to be carrying those crosses, and if potentially not, to remove those crosses. But you can kind of accidentally fall into this spot of thinking that life's somehow a game you beat. And it isn't. Life is a game that everybody at the end dies. And we hope and pray, all of us hope to have long lives where we die peacefully after living a fulfilling life, seeing our children live fulfilling lives. But often that isn't how it happens. And tragically, sometimes that isn't how it happens for those around us either, including those closest to us. And so ultimately, we can't prevent, there's so many things we cannot prevent. We need to be wise, we need to be prudent. Obviously, just recklessly going into situations without any preparation or care will cause consequences that are not meant by God to happen. Not exactly crosses, rather just consequences of a lack of wisdom. But when it comes to things like things happening on a global scale that many of us have no control over other than praying, it really kind of comes back to the Padre Pio quote, pray. We can pray about it, but then we have to hold on to hope, and then we have to not worry about it. We can do little practical things in our life to try to be responsible, to prepare. But ultimately, anything that creates anxiety or desperation, anything that would take an extreme level of effort that would disrupt a lot of your fulfilling of your vocation or your daily duties, really needs to be discerned carefully over time before it's just done, even if initially it feels like the thing you need to do to protect yourself. Now, obviously, I'm not saying there's never a situation. Obviously, in the Bible, St. Joseph was told in a dream very abruptly to move his family to Egypt. And so sometimes God can call us to very abruptly uproot ourselves for our own safety and for the accomplishment of his will. But in most cases, those anxious feelings do stem from that self-love, that self-preservation, that feeling of, I don't want to be the martyr. And I tell my husband, and we talk about this a lot, just like, there's going to be generations, and in some countries that generation is right now, people who are going to be the martyrs, and either it's us or it's our kids or it's our great grandkids. But regardless, the best thing we can do is to hold fast to God and to show our kids and teach our kids, both by example and by actual instruction, to hold on to God as well. Because ultimately, if something horrible happened to me or my husband and our children were left alone, or if somehow something horrible happened to them and they were not with us, there's nothing you can do, especially little children, to prepare them to correctly save themselves from a situation. The only thing you can do is give them faith, so that if they're isolated and in their darkest moments, they have been taught at least to turn to God. And it's something that you never want to think about, and yet times like these make you think about a lot of things you'd rather not think about. And so ultimately, that just gentle living out of the daily duties, showcasing love of God in those daily moments, and just trusting that when it's your time, there's nothing you can really do to get away from that. My husband and I talk a lot about, there's a scene in the show Lost. I don't necessarily recommend. It's an old show, older. But there's a character who keeps trying to get away from dying, and he keeps seeing these like kind of visions of how he's going to die, and they keep changing. And so he'll kind of like preemptively see something that was about to kill him and escape it. But ultimately he's kind of like fated to die. And so he does. He keeps getting out of one situation just to immediately end up in another situation, because ultimately he was meant to die at that moment. And life is kind of like that. If God has a certain plan for us and we're truly trying to surrender to his plan, there's not really any escaping that plan if you're trying to get to heaven. Ultimately, it's kind of like people struggle maybe with running away from their vocation, like good Catholics that are struggling to accept their vocation, so they run away or delay it for a while, but ultimately they end up having to choose, either I'm going to reject God and completely live my life apart from him, or I'm going to finally surrender to the vocation I know I'm called to. And I think that can be the case for our lives as well, whether that's just daily responsibilities that we don't want to take up, or whether that is ultimately crosses, and even the ultimate cross, and how our story ends, that God knows how he intends that to go. And if we are truly trying to live our life for him, then we're going to have to accept that no matter what it is. We can pray and ask God and intercede for ourselves, for our children, for our families, that it would go well. Jesus shows us that himself. He is meant to die on the cross. That's why he came. And yet he still does ask if it's possible for the cup to pass from him, for him not to have to face that cross. And I think it is a reminder that you can ask that. And ultimately, in the scope of how God works, he can grant those prayers. But just like Jesus, there are many instances where we are still meant to face those crosses. And so ultimately, no amount of being afraid and trying through our own effort to avoid those things will make that happen. You can have all the money and resources to prepare or to try to insulate your children, isolate yourself as much as possible. And yet if God has a certain plan for you, that means that things will end tragically. It doesn't matter how far you run, that end will find you if it's meant to serve him in some way. So that's not maybe very hopeful sounding, but I guess the hopeful point is that means all that there really is to do is be prudent. If there's basic things you can do to be more prepared, do them, whether that's spiritual or literal, just physical. Can you get your money in order? Even like around here we have hurricanes, like we can at least make sure we have stuff here if their power went out, so we'd have enough food and water for a few days. Like basics. I'm not talking about ignoring the basics, making sure you're saving, because you have to live like you're going to have a normal lifespan, but know deep down, especially when things get crazy like this, that the unexpected could happen, which is why before you even get your physical house in order, you need to get your spiritual house in order, and frequent the sacraments as much as possible, go to confession as much as possible, and in the midst of this beautiful Eucharistic revival, embrace that and embrace the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Just lean on God, surround your life with prayer. Anytime you're stressed, anxious, tempted to doom scroll, swap it out for something Jesus related, and show your kids how to do that too. Just embrace the daily moments, Because ultimately, even if the whole world was running perfectly, something tragic could still happen. And if something tragic happened all of a sudden that cut your life or one of the lives of somebody you loved short, you wouldn't wish you spent more time preparing or somehow trying to avoid that situation, especially if it was an unexpected, kind of unavoidable one, like many kind of unexpected things are. You would wish you spent more time just absorbing those tiny little everyday moments that are so special, the moments that are so easy, especially when we're tired or stressed, to miss because we're distracted staring at our phone, worrying about other things instead. As a parent, that's a really easy thing to realize that, these little tiny moments, as hard as some of the daily moments can be, the daily moments are also the most special ones, where suddenly you look up and you're like, wow, I can't believe she's already past that stage. I can't believe she's already this age. I can't believe it's already been 2 or 3 years since she stopped acting that way or looking that way. Like, it goes so fast and each stage is so special. So anyway, be with God in the present and trust that He'll take care of the rest. Be prudent, but ultimately really challenge yourself. I'm challenging myself after reading that this morning. Like, when I start to be afraid or stressed or wanting to overly prepare in a very materialistic, worldly sense of that word, is it out of self-love, trying to self-preserve, trying to pretend like I can beat life somehow? Because otherwise, if it's just out of love of God, I know I don't have to worry because I know He will take care of everything. All throughout the Bible, He fed people when there was nothing, whether it was the woman and her son who the prophet, I can't remember if it's Elijah or Elisha, came to see, and her jug of oil and her flour and oil never ran out through the whole drought until the drought was over and she was taken care of. She had food, or whether it is the manna, or whether it is the Eucharist itself, the life that we need, whether it's water from rock multiple times throughout the Old Testament. Like, God has proven so many times in the Bible, He'll keep us fed. He'll make sure we have water. Like, He can do that today. It's not only something He did in the past. He can take care of the material things if we are truly trusting Him and we're being wise. Obviously, if you decide to hike out into the desert as some kind of test of God to see if He'll feed you, that may not go so well. But if tragedy strikes and you're not meant to die of starvation, He'll make sure you have the food you need. And we have to radically trust that. So anyway, that was rambly and longer than I meant for it to be. Just hold on to hope. Read spiritual things that you can. Frequent the sacraments as much as possible. But ultimately, at the end of the day, all you have is the moment that's right in front of you. So don't let fear or worry overshadow that. Because if everything works out great, you'll really regret spending this time now so entrenched in worry that you missed these moments of your life, your kids' lives, your spouse's lives, your friends' lives. So be present and just trust that He'll take care of the rest. And to God be the glory. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.